that why is this situation in the US Congress regarding the aid to Ukraine? If it's clear that the Putin's plan is clear, he wants to grab to see significant part of Ukraine, and he will not stop. He will not stop here. And the president of the United States, Joe Biden, said it out loud, and not only one time, but during long periods since the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I don't understand. Please, it looks like the world is unfair. Everybody understands that Putin is a very bad guy, but everybody understands that Ukraine needs to be supported. And nothing has changed.
So the US Congress, why is it going slow? There's a few different reasons. As you know, I just arrived back from Washington, D.C., where I was for a couple of months, specifically looking at issues related to Ukraine. And what I noticed is that I think that there is still strong support with the decision makers in America for Ukraine and for funding for Ukraine. And the polling shows that, the statistics show that. Especially those who are informed about the situation in Ukraine, are very supportive. The Speaker of the House, for instance, a Republican, very close to Trump, he himself has said that he understands that we must stop Putin now before he poses a greater threat to the rest of Europe. So I anticipate that the Republicans will, in the end, be able to vote in favor of more weaponry for Ukraine. It's simply not in anyone's interest, and certainly not the U.S.'s interest either, that Putin has a free hand and feels that he's empowered, or that the United States is not willing to stand up to him. It's all the contrary. I mean, Russia is a very poor, impoverished country. The military is very backwards compared to the U.S. military, obviously. And so we should be able to flex muscle and show our strength without any fear of Putin's repercussion. And so I don't think that the Americans are worried about that. I think that simply the news cycle, a lot's going on in America. We have our own elections for president next year. And I think there's a lot more focus on that. So maybe Ukraine's less in the news, not because there's a fear of Putin or because people don't support Ukraine, but simply because there's other things that are in the news right now that are a greater priority for most Americans that they feel every single day.
In more detail, yes, of course. So, and there is another question, which is, I think it looks like, it's unfair regarding Ukraine. Do you have an answer to the question why Ukraine actually does not have the right to strike Russia with long-range weapons? Why does USA constantly restrict Ukraine? Is this fair?
Well, I think that's normal. I mean, usually the United States is not trying to...
This is the first time in the country when the country who has to defend, but can't strike to the other country who our enemy. Sorry.
I understand you perfectly well. So I think that in this case, though, we have to look at something. The United States is obviously not trying to involve itself directly in the conflict. And that's why since the very beginning, Joe Biden has said the United States will not have boots on the ground, that is to say soldiers, participating in the war here in Ukraine. At the same time, the United States is willing to arm Ukrainians who are willing to fight for their freedom so that they can best defend themselves. But to strike within Russia would be a provocation. The Russian government would undoubtedly view that as being assistance to try to topple their government. And that could be something that would destabilize U.S.-Russia relations, which are already very bad. But the potential of it becoming a hot conflict is real. It can't be totally ignored. And keep in mind, it's more complicated than just what happens with Ukraine. Russia has a great deal of influence in other countries that are also important to the U.S., such as in Latin America, in Africa, and other regions. And I think that the United States is trying to avoid Russia destabilizing those countries in response to Ukraine having used weapons from America against Russia.
What do you think? The nuclear threat, is it affect too much of the states if we are talking about Russia? As you said, that the United States doesn't want to provoke Russia to use nuclear weapon. Is this nuclear threat really big so far?
I mean, it is a real threat. We can't dismiss it as being completely unreasonable. It could definitely happen. I think it's improbable, but it's not impossible. It could definitely happen. And I think that most people do feel that Russia, given the fact that it's a very broken society, it is run sort of like a mafia more than like a country. it's become sort of unpredictable at different points, unlike other countries. So I do not fear it, and I don't think anyone should fear it. I absolutely don't think Ukraine, when it's deciding to, for instance, do drone strikes within Russia or in port cities of Russia, I don't think they should be afraid of that whatsoever. The fact is that Putin will not use nuclear weapons for that. I think that Putin would only use nuclear weapons in a situation where he felt there was an existential threat for Russia's existence, such as an attack on Moscow. I don't see that, though, in anything that Ukraine's doing.